Most people have a certain image in their mind when they think about the state of Massachusetts, and usually it's wealthy, white, and suburban. Of course, there's plenty of this in the Bay State, but like all things, there are two sides to every story. Let's take a look at the other side of Massachusetts, the hoods and trenches that so many people seem to overlook. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. So today I've got a hopefully fun video you guys will enjoy. I'm expecting to get some good viewer engagement in the comments, hopefully. I guarantee there'll be at least a couple people riled up about the order of the list and who's on it or not on it. Sometimes it's fun to get a little rise out of you guys, and who knows, maybe many of you will agree with me completely and think I did a great job. Most likely not, but anyhow, let's take a dive into the top 10 most gangsta cities in Massachusetts. Coming in at number 10, we have Fitchburg, aka the Dirty Burg. Located, depending on traffic, about an hour or so west of Boston, Fitchburg sits directly north of Worcester, which is Massachusetts' second largest city. Fitchburg is located in what I would refer to as the Rust Belt of Massachusetts. It's a series of old industrial mill towns and cities where the factory work has mostly long since left. In its place, it's left unemployment, stagnant economies, increased narcotics traffic, higher levels of poverty than the state average, and most often than not, higher crime rates as well. Fitchburg has fallen victim to many of the post-industrial city pitfalls, especially the narco trade. Mostly this trade is controlled by Latino DTOs operating in the area, some run by or in connection with well-known street organizations like the LKs or La Familia. Some are unaffiliated family organizations like a father and son team that was arrested in a sting for pushing large quantities of Fetty and Hard in the city of Fitchburg a few years back. So I just had to pop in here because I know there's going to be some geography whiz that's going to pop in the comments. Say, Fitchburg's not directly north of Worcester. I didn't mean it's like the next town north of Worcester. It's just if you look at a map, I should have said due north. Like if you look at a map, you look straight up on the map, Fitchburg and Leominster are like directly north. Not the next town north, but it's like due north. If you just drive straight north, you'll get there. So just want to clarify that before people start chirping in the comments. Everybody is a expert with geography, with like genetic lineage. Like when I made the video about King Merlin and the Operation Throwdown, everybody's like, Italians are Latin as well. They can be part of the organization. As I know, Italian is a romantic language and it stems from Latin. So if you want to get technical, yes, they are Latin as well. So thank you. Moving on to number 9, we have the largest city in Middlesex County, Lowell, aka Mill City. Lowell, Mass., which is aptly nicknamed Mill City, was once the heart of America's Industrial Revolution and one of the crown jewels of the Union. Lowell manufactured the vast majority of textiles for America in the second half of the 19th century, attracting thousands of immigrants from Greece, Eastern Europe, and beyond to work in the factories and mills. By the 1960s and 70s, many of the mills had closed, leading to massive unemployment and poverty rates. Many Latinos began moving into Lowell in the late 1960s and 70s. Then in the early 80s, thousands and thousands of Cambodian refugees, many that had immigrated first to California, began settling into Lowell. There was an abundance of affordable housing in the city because of so many residents previously leaving for lack of jobs. This was a big reason for the Cambodian influx. As of now, Lowell, Mass. Has the highest Cambodian population on the East Coast and second in America only to Long Beach, California. Around 20,000 of Lowell's 100,000 plus residents are of Cambodian descent, 1/5 of the total population. During the 1980s, Lowell became a hub for narcotics. Old timers tell me that in the 80s, Lowell was the copping spot, not Lawrence. That changed in the 90s when Lawrence became Browntown #1 in Massachusetts. HBO even made a special about Lowell that featured famous boxer Mickey Ward's brother, Dickie Eklund, who was a good boxer in his own right. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's absolutely legendary. Obviously, different groups took advantage of the lucrative trade on Lowell streets, and naturally, violence followed. Now, there were many neighborhood crews that were native to Mill City, but more increasingly throughout the late 80s and early 90s, more and more people were coming to Lowell and bringing their affiliations with them. Many Southeast Asian crews began in Lowell to protect themselves from Latino and white crews, but over time many of them now beef with each other. Lowell still to this day is an epicenter for Southeast Asian street organizations in Massachusetts and beyond, really kind of the whole East Coast, with nationally syndicated groups like ABZ, TRG, and various red sets, plus some crews that originated in Lowell. There are also Latino organizations like the Trinitarios, the Latin Kings. There's also GDs, among many others. The HAMC, the biggest 1% motorcycle club in the entire world, had their first clubhouse in the Bay State in Lowell as well. Now moving on to number 8, Holyoke, Mass. Out in the western part of the state, Holyoke is a bit of an eyesore. What was once one of the largest manufacturers of paper in the world, Holyoke is now a city of destitution and decay. Not only did Holyoke have some of the most productive paper mills in the country, it was also the heart of Puerto Rican Massachusetts. Many of the first Puerto Ricans to come to Massachusetts were post-WW2 migrant farm workers that came up in the Connecticut River Valley area looking for work during the harvest season. Wanting to stay permanently and looking for year-round work, many flocked to nearby Holyoke to work in the paper mills. By the 1970s, most of the mills had closed down, leading to a belly-up economy and virtually no jobs. The narcotics trade came in and replaced the paper mills for the number one industry in the city. Holyoke is certainly one of those cities when driving around town, you don't really have to wonder about what's going on behind the scenes. Now, the city of Holyoke, Mass. has long been a stronghold, along with nearby Springfield, for the almighty Latin King nation for decades now. Also, the organization La Familia has been a force in the city for a while. I'm sure that there are many other syndicated and freelance crews operating in Holyoke over the years and presently. Holyoke, unfortunately for its residents, year after year for decades now, is always ranked among the state's worst for crime statistics, unemployment, poverty, education, etc. And the way that part of the state has been heading, I don't believe that's going to be changing for the better anytime soon. Alrighty, coming in at number 7. This is one that I think people are going to have a little problem with because it's not up higher on the list. But here we go. Number 7, we have the second largest city in the Bay State. Welcome to Worcester. $1.25, please. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. Worcester, even though it's the second largest city in Mass, I don't know much about it. It's literally one of the only large cities in Mass that I haven't covered on the channel. I think I've only been in the city an actual couple times maybe as a kid. I usually just drive by its exit on the highway going on a road trip somewhere. I've never used out there, and the only time I've actually met people from there is when I've gone to Spectrum and Westboro. Even though Springfield's like an hour farther west than Worcester, I know a lot more about it and I actually have some friends out there. Obviously, being a city of its size, Worcester has plenty of this activity in bad areas, even though I think it has improved over the last few years a little bit. One area in the city I always used to hear about back in the day was South Main. I guess it's changed recently, but back in the day it was like a small scale open air kind of situation, open air market kind of situation, if you know what I mean. My first celly I had at Middleton when I was 18 was a Puerto Rican kid from Worcester. I'll always remember he was talking about the valley on and on. He kept saying, everybody knows I got the fattest bags in Tacoma. And he was going through withdrawals, sitting on the toilet, sweating and having the chills at the same time. It's a nice visual. But so for a long time, I've known about the bustling narcotics trade in the city. But of course, like other cities we've discussed, there's plenty of organizations operating in Worcester as well. One of the more interesting things I learned about Worcester is that it's one of the only cities that I know of, at least, in the Bay State that has vice lords, a group that originated in Chicago. All different types of variations of blue and red have migrated into Mass. Southeast Asian groups that have morphed into multiracial crews like TRG. Even other Chicago-born mega organizations like the LKs and the GDs are all over Massachusetts. But the only place I've ever heard of vice lords being in the state is the city of Worcester. It's my 2 cents on Worcester. Moving on to number 6, another old mill city from the Merrimack Valley, Lawrence, aka Lawtown. Lawrence is one of the 2 main hubs for this culture in Essex County, Lawrence in the Merrimack Valley and Lynn on Boston's North Shore. Not only is Lawrence a hotbed for street organizations, but it's a narcotics hub for northern Mass, southern New Hampshire, and really most of the northern New England area. Many people drive for hours and hours, sometimes multiple times a day, from all parts of New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine to come to Lawrence for its illicit goods. Donald Trump even called out Lawrence by name when he was originally run for president in 2016. At that point, New Hampshire had jumped from one of the lowest death rates due to Brown to one of the highest in the country, and Trump blamed Lawrence, a city right across the New Hampshire border, for this. Well, specifically, he blamed illegal Dominican immigrants from Lawrence. While Trump was partially right, Lawrence is a hub for Massachusetts and really all of northern New England, and that trade is mostly controlled by Dominicans, of which Lawrence has the second highest concentration of Dominicans in Massachusetts, second only to Boston. But like most things, Trump was using it as an example to make a point about immigration. Beyond freelancers and actual Dominican DTOs operating in conjunction with their partners in the DR, there are many well-known organizations in Lawrence. Back in the 1990s, the Latin Kings and the GDs were 2 of the first groups to emerge in the city and were deeply involved in the H trade. These 2 groups were rivals, and the feud carried on into the Essex County Correctional Facility, aka Middleton Jail. Another group that originated in Lawrence and I don't believe exists outside the Merrimack Valley is the Outlaws. Not the 1%er biker club, but a street crew called the Outlaws, who are also rivals of the GDs. The Outlaws still exist, but the majority of beef in Lawrence and the Merrimack Valley, like neighboring cities Haverhill and Methuen, is between the GDs and the Trinitarios, a Dominican group who has become a force in Massachusetts over the last few decades. All right, before we jump into the top 5, let's throw out a couple honorable mentions, shall we? Right next to number 10, Fitchburg, really was kind of a coin toss between the two, is another old factory slash mill city, Leominster, which is very similar to Fitchburg and other old industrial Rust Belt cities in Massachusetts. Right out in that area is another old mill city, Gardner, Mass., which was one of the first leading manufacturers of furniture in the country. I had a wrestling tournament out there in high school, and it was kind of a dump, and of course, I love that. Usually, at least, there's one or two members from Gardner in the latest Latin King Federal Roundup that they do in Massachusetts every few years. Also, Chicopee, which is a kind of a rundown little city out by Springfield. Quick shout out. Oh my goodness. I'm like doing the video and I can't believe I forgot Chelsea. Like Chelsea should be at least on the top 10 list, probably even maybe like a 9 or an 8, I think. I don't know, but I just can't believe I left Chelsea out. Chelsea's technically it's in Suffolk County. It's like right north of Boston. Then it's like the beginning of the North Shore, I guess, because like Revere and Saugus and stuff, and Lynn are right after it. But Chelsea's always been like a real hard scrabble city. It used to be called like the Jerusalem of America. It had some of the highest concentration of Jewish people in the whole United States at one point. I didn't even realize that. It had tons of factories, but throughout the 20th century, second half of the 20th century, it started going really downhill, lost a lot of jobs. It used to be like a really, really grungy city. Like when you were driving out of Boston, we'd always drive over the bridge and look down on Chelsea. And you see all like the really dilapidated triple deckers and stuff. There's a lot of Central America, some of like the most notorious Central American organizations that are out there in the world. They're in Chelsea. So I just can't believe I forgot to put Chelsea on the list. So I just got to shout out Chelsea. Really, really, really dropped the ball on that one. Also, there was a really big case a few years ago involving ESMG, East Side Money Gang. They were beefing with Maverick over in East Boston, and they had a pretty big case. It was around the same time that a lot of the stuff was going on in the North Shore, like Operation Street Sweeper. So might be a case I cover in the future. I don't know. We'll see. All right, top 5. Here we go with the big boys. Now I'll concede right here, starting at 5. This might be the only place where maybe I feel like I've made a little mistake. I should have switched 7 and 5 around and put Worcester here, but what the heck. Number 5, New Bedford, aka New Beige. New Bedford, which is in Bristol County on Massachusetts' south coast next to its neighboring city of Fall River. These two cities are very unique in Massachusetts for their incredibly high concentration of Portuguese residents. There are plenty of Portuguese and Azorians in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but these two cities have an uncommonly high percentage. They also have very rough reputations. New Bedford does have one thing going for them, and that's an incredibly thriving fishing industry. New Bedford replaced my hometown of Gloucester back probably in the 70s or 80s as Massachusetts' biggest fishing port. Gloucester's fleet is only a fraction of what it used to be, while New Bedford has thousands of active fishing vessels. They probably land more scallops than anywhere else in the country, if not the world. But New Bedford also has a very active narcotics trade, which is mostly controlled by beefing street organizations. Two of the main ones being the Latin Kings and GEDs. In Operation Throwdown, the last major federal RICO case that the government used to try to dismantle the Kings in Massachusetts, the majority of the people indicted were from the Springfield area and New Bedford. I think it was something crazy like 22 of the actual total people indicted were from the Latin Kings New Bedford chapter, which mostly operates out of the north side of the city. They had been battling their hated rivals, the GDs, for control of New Bedford's lucrative narco trade for years now. Besides this, there's some Cape Verdeans in New Bedford, and there's also some ABZ that began in the neighboring city of Fall River as well. Number 4. You ready for this? This one's definitely going to get some people chirping in the comments. Lynn, the city of sin. Lynn, Mass., which is Essex County's largest city population-wise, is also a hub for the county's street organizations. Like I said, Lawrence is the hub on the Merrimack Valley, and Lynn is the spot on the North Shore. While Lynn certainly is a source city for a lot of the other wealthy communities on the North Shore, the narco trade isn't as big as it is in Lawrence. In Lawrence, the Dominican DTOs, who were already running the H trade, started hooking up with Mexican cartels back in the 20-teens to become some of the largest Fetty traffickers on the East Coast. But if we're discussing the most gangster cities in Massachusetts, you cannot deny the effect that Lynn has had on the area and its surrounding communities, and it's the epicenter for the culture on Boston's North Shore. Almost every set or crew that has popped up on the North Shore and Essex County Correctional Facility that was not from Lawrence or Haverhill originated in Lynn. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, dudes from Lynn were spreading all over the North Shore, dealing in smaller towns and cities and bringing their affiliations with them. I remember dudes setting up shop in the projects in Gloucester, Maplewood Park, or Riverdale Park, some single mom's house pumping hard or just bud sometimes and trying to recruit people. Ever since the 1980s, this culture has dominated Lynn, and still to this day, it's now probably truer than ever. That's why I always find it funny when people say, Lynn ain't nothing. Obviously, it's not Dorchester or Roxbury, but it's an incredibly active place at all levels. Certainly narcotics, and multiple people die every year to street violence in the city of Lynn, Mass. If I can get my ducks in a row and bring you this video I've been working on for quite some time, I'll show many of you who might previously been unaware just how active Lynn can be. It'll come, I promise. Now, Lynn has a little bit of everything, all types of blue and red sets, some nationally syndicated like ABZ, some homegrown like OB and YB and AKC, and even more recently LCG. Is that not enough acronyms? Because there's some more. There's LKs and GDs. There was a notorious crew in the late 90s, early 2000s called the Deuce Boys, La Familia, TRG, the Fair Trinitarios, also many of the original CWBs, aka C-Dubs, the main white group in Middleton Jail, which is now spread to all different correctional facilities in Massachusetts, many of the original members from Lynn. Not to mention, Lynn since the late 1960s has been a stronghold for the infamous HAMC, the largest and most feared 1% club in the world. The North Shore is our heartland in Massachusetts, and Lynn and Salem are the core of that. Is that enough qualification for the city of Lynn? Lynn is by far the most diverse city on the North Shore, almost equal parts white, Hispanic, and black, but there's also a sizable Southeast Asian population in the city. All these groups are well accounted for in the demographics of the underworld as well. Lynn's politics also include the Point neighborhood of Salem, South Peabody, and back in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were tied in with Shirley Ave and Revere as well. The most current and well-known beef in Lynn is something I've researched heavily lately. It's between LCG and TRG versus the Trinitarios, aka the Patrias. The beef began the bloody year of 2017 in Lynn and technically still hasn't ended to this day. If you can help me with anything or add anything to that story, please hit me up. Before I move on, I gotta shout out the Point neighborhood in Salem. Although overall Salem is a pretty safe city and is more well known for their Halloween haunted happenings than any street stuff, the Point neighborhood is incredibly active. If you woke up in somebody's car in the Point and someone told you were in Washington Heights or some other hood somewhere, you'd probably believe them. It's only a couple blocks, but there's so much narco traffic and different sets operating in one little area, there's always something popping off down at the Point. So I hope that's enough information to justify putting Lynn up that high on the list, and if not, I really don't care. That's where I'm putting it. Honestly, I'd prefer to put it at number 3 instead of the next city I'm about to mention, but I figured if I put it any higher up on the list, people would definitely call me out for North Shore or Essex County favoritism. But number 3 on the list, Fall River. Now I feel like some of you might not agree that Fall River should be this high up on the list. The Riv has always had a tough reputation like its neighboring city of New Bedford, but unfortunately they don't have the thriving fishing industry that New Beige does, just a lot of narcotics, crime, and lower than average incomes. Fall River has the highest concentration of Portuguese Americans in the entire country, and during the early 1990s, Fall River and Gloucester, Mass. Both had some of the highest HIV rates per capita in the Western Hemisphere due to users sharing their gear with each other. Couldn't go to the pharmacy and buy it, you had to get it illegally, so a lot of people shared it. Fall River is one of the most active cities in the region of the state, and with all the wealthy communities on and or near the Cape, there's plenty of customers always heading towards the Riv in need of goods. As a kid, my Cub Scout troop and I slept overnight on one of the battleships in Battleship Cove, and as an adult, every time I went to Plymouth High Point, there was mad kids from Fall River yelling, Now, the Riv is interesting to me for several reasons. Of course, over the years, nationally syndicated sets of blue and red would come to the city, along with GDs and LKs, among others. But Fall River had many homegrown crews, many of whom were made up of mostly Portuguese kids, sometimes strictly Portuguese. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was white street crews like this, but not organized. It was mostly like West Side Story type of things. There definitely weren't many going into the 80s and 90s, still actively operating like the ones in Fall River. It was quite an anomaly, especially in Massachusetts. Some of these legendary homegrown groups in Fall River that had mostly Portuguese members were DBZ, the Dover Boys, that represented with the color green. And someone in the comments one time when I made a video about Fall River was saying that Dover Boys had the Doinka. I don't know, that's some weird Fall River Portuguese stuff I don't know nothing about. This is one of the most legendary crews from the Riv, but you also had the Flint Boys. Then there was BBH, or the Boys Below the Hill. Many cities back in the 1950s to the 70s had white street crews, but this mostly phased out through the 80s. Many of the white organizations that exist in America originated in prison or based from correctional facilities, if you're excluding organized crime. So Fall River was definitely unique in this regard, having multiple white street crews well into the 1990s, some that were exclusively Portuguese. I don't think there's anywhere else in America where you'll find evidence of that. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was a brief explosion of Cambodians and other Southeast Asian groups in the city of Fall River. This saw the emergence of groups like TRG, ABZ, OB, and OSW in the city. I heard that many Cambodians settled in the Flint section of Fall River, and some Cambodian kids and Flint boys created RJC in the 1990s, which seemed like some sort of hybrid crew. Even after many of the Cambodian residents had moved on because of Fall River's poor economy, groups like ABZ have stayed and now are one of the more dominant groups in the city, just morphed and many of the members being white or Hispanic now. GDs also have a very strong presence in the city, along with La Familia. It's also worthy of note that one percenters have made Fall River a battle zone in the last few years. The outlaws who developed a power base in the Brockton and Taunton area were moving into Fall River, so the HAs strengthened their position in the neighboring town of Westport. Now, not only were the hated outlaws pushing into the HA's territory and threatening the Cape Cod area, but another powerful East Coast club, the Pagans, set up a clubhouse in Fall River as well. The HAMC, who have claimed mass for multiple decades, don't like other clubs like the Outlaws and Pagans asserting themselves in the Bay State. The HA's power base is north of Boston, especially the North Shore, but they most likely don't want any other one percenters in the state, let alone building up their forces in it. The HAs rode in a 100-plus bike procession into Fall River, and a smaller group broke off and rode on the Pagans' clubhouse and inflicted multiple casualties on a small group of club members hanging out in front of the clubhouse. Alright, I hope that's sufficient evidence for you people who claim Fall River is soft. You know! Alright, before we do the top 2 cities, I didn't include Boston in the top 10 list. Oh, little secret there, a little twist I didn't tell you guys about until now if you're still watching the video. It's just not fair. Boston is so much bigger than any other city on the list, and there's so many different neighborhoods in the actual municipality of Boston. Also, you can't compare Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and the South End to any other city on the list either. It's just different. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to break down in order the most gangster neighborhoods in Boston minus the Seaport, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, you know, the high rent districts. Oh, the last couple honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. I'm going to give Pittsfield a shout out because you got to have one city from Berkshire County, since when they released the crime stats, weird towns like North Adams and Webster are always the top of the list. I'm going to shout out Cambridge too, even though it's been heavily gentrified. There's still some active areas in the projects and stuff. And there's 1 or 2 active projects in Somerville, even though that city's been completely gentrified. Taunton used to have a little activity out there I'm not sure about now. And then Haverhill, aka Helltown. That's really why I wanted to put it number 10, but I figured if I put 3 Essex County cities on the list, you guys would certainly revolt. Alright, so before I reveal 1 and 2 on the list, let's break down Boston's hoods. So disqualifying the very upscale and touristy sections, let's start with Brighton, which did have a couple active projects, then Roslindale, then we got the North End, which is definitely a tourist destination, but it's still the North End. Many Italians still live there. It hasn't been really gentrified. And along with East Boston has always been the home base of Cosa Nostra in the city. Then you have Southie and Charlestown, used to be 2 of the tougher neighborhoods in the city up until the 1990s and were unique in being quote-unquote white Irish American ghettos, long after such things had disappeared in other parts of the country. Even though these 2 neighborhoods are 2 of the most gentrified in the city and the rents have skyrocketed, there's still a few active projects in each neighborhood where you can find the familiar illegal activities that the neighborhoods were known for. Next, Chinatown. Even though most of the street crews have dried up that dominated Chinatown streets in the 80s and 90s, which caused record-settling levels of violence, Chinatown is still completely ungentrified, and down by the T-stop on Beach Street down to Grand Street and Stewart Street, there's plenty of dudes selling hard and girls walking the street. Not as much as it was 15 years ago, but it's still around. This is where the infamous combat zone used to be located in that general area. Next is Hyde Park, which I feel a lot of people overlook. Hyde Park, but it definitely has plenty of street activity and crews in the neighborhood. The area is mixed, but has a high concentration of Haitians and other West Indians. Moving up the list is East Boston, which is finally now starting to become a target for gentrification. Not only was it a Cosa Nostra stronghold for decades, but there's homegrown crews like Maverick that's based out of the Maverick Projects in EC. They beefed with ESG or ESMG from next door Chelsea. There's also a strong presence in EC of the 2 most feared Central American organizations in the world. The top 5 most gangsta neighborhoods in Boston. Really not hard to figure out after you've been listening to the list so far. At number 5, we have Jamaica Plain, aka JP, or as Trotty Y Jizzle calls it, Jurassic Park. JP has been changing lately like most of Boston, but it's still home to the Mildred C. Haley Apartments, aka the Heath Street Projects, which I believe is Boston's biggest housing project, and is home to Boston's feared Heath Street crew that rock Miami Heat gear. It was also the setting for Boston's deadliest Latino conflict, aka Boylston Street versus Mozart Park. Number 4, the South End. Now, the South End is very interesting because it has some very, very wealthy residents and real estate, but it's also home to some notorious housing projects and mass and cast Boston's equivalent to Kensington and Philadelphia. You have the Cathedral projects, the Villa Victoria projects, which is Boston's first Puerto Rican project, and hood. You have the Tent City projects, and then there was the Mass Ave Hornets in the 80s, and I still see people wearing Hornet stuff around Mass Ave. The South End has seen the highest jump in crime stats than any other neighborhood in the city, which most likely has something to do with the PJs, but it's predominantly because of the disaster around Mass and Cass. Number 3. This was tough. I knew pretty easily which one I was going to put first, but I wasn't sure if 3 should be Roxbury or Mattapan. I decided to put Mattapan at 3 and Roxbury at 2. It was kind of a tough choice, but that's what I did. They're both by far 2 of the more dangerous areas in Boston, although they are a little bit different. Roxbury and the South End were the original hearts of Black Boston, while Mattapan through most of the 50s and early 60s was white, predominantly Jewish, with a lot of single-family homes mixed in. For decades now, Mattapan has been one of the most violent neighborhoods in the city. I've heard people that say if Mattapan gets gentrified, Boston's really over. As of late, there's more and more Latinos moving into Mattapan, and they're quickly becoming one of the largest ethnic groups in the city. Roxbury has more of a big city feel to it, almost like a smaller version of Harlem or something. Roxbury definitely has like a certain allure to it, and that's why I'm putting it at number 2. So that obviously leaves number 1 as the neighborhood of Dorchester. Dorchester is Boston's largest and most diverse neighborhood, and also the deadliest. Geneva, Columbia Road, Four Corners, Codman Square, Blue Hill Ave, Columbia Point, aka Harbor Point, Fields Corners, among many, many others, are legendary hoods inside this neighborhood where it's not uncommon to witness street violence and people dying on a regular basis. This is the side of Boston the local media doesn't like to focus on. I hope you guys enjoyed that little breakdown. It's just not fair to compare Boston to the rest of the cities on this list. It's not. So here we are, the 2 top cities on the list. This was a tough decision, honestly. I'm not gonna lie, I had a tough time picking between these 2. I've definitely talked about one of the cities a lot, but not enough about the other one. The only difference really is that one of these cities has a more diverse underworld than the other. So here we are, guys. Number 2, Springfield, Mass. So Springfield has always been a rough city with a bad reputation, but its worst year on record last year was 2023. A record number of people were unalived during 2023, almost doubling from the previous year. Luckily for Springfield, which almost seemed like they were going to come apart at the seams last year, 2024 has seen a sharp decrease in the number of people being unalived. Authorities say the majority of these crimes are not random and they're targeted attacks between different street organizations. The Latin Kings have been a dominant force in Springfield for decades. Operation Throwdown targeted many Latin King leaders in Mass, some from Springfield, including King Merlin, who was the alleged overseer of the entire East Coast operation. King Merlin had close family ties to the Cosa Nostra in Springfield. Based out of the south end of the city, the Springfield crew ran the city for the Genovese family out of New York and not Boston or Providence. This all fell apart when Anthony Alada double-crossed his boss, Big Al Bruno, and had him whacked. Even though the La Cosa Nostra members in Springfield were obviously criminals and not everyone thinks of them fondly in their memories, it's widely believed that they kept some sort of order on the streets and in the underworld. Throughout the 2000s, the already dingy city of Springfield began to deteriorate more and more each year. They built that big casino a little ways back, trying to make the city more desirable or attract more visitors, but as far as I can tell, it hasn't done anything to improve the city. The Mount Carmel Social Club in the South End was the center of the Italian-American community in the city, and also the base of operations for the local Cosa Nostra. That's where Anthony Arriolata set the trap for his boss, Big Al Bruno, as he left his weekly pinochle game at the club. It was alleged that King Merlin was holding meetings with other top Latin kings inside the Mount Carmel Social Club as well. Not only that, but after he set up his boss and then turned all his peers as an informant, Anthony Arriolata has streamed videos on YouTube from the club talking about his experiences. That shows how much organized crime has really changed in the city. Like I said, hopefully last year was just a really, really bad year, and there's only been about half as many bodies as there was last year. But Springfield is definitely a troubled city. High unemployment, little to no economy, high crime rates, narcotics, and all types of street crews running wild. It's just a very chaotic place. I've also seen lots of videos of groups of people riding through the streets in packs of ATVs and dirt bikes, just causing havoc everywhere they go. It's just another element of chaos when you're driving through the city with packs of ATVs and dirt bikes coming flying by you doing wheelies. The city just in general is just a wild place. So I'm sure if you've watched this video this far, you can probably guess what number 1 is going to be. You might not necessarily agree with it, but it's pretty obvious by now. If I haven't mentioned it, it's got to be number 1. Brockton, Massachusetts. This city south of Boston has had a rough reputation going back to the beginning of the 20th century. You can find old pictures of Brockton online on Google, looking up like Brockton tenements and Brockton slums, stuff like that. Brockton earned its rep through its hardscrabble streets and its ability also to turn out quality prize fighters. Some of the most famous boxers to come out of the city are the legendary Rocky Marciano, who ended his career at a whopping undefeated 49-0. Plus champ Marvelous Marvin Hagler, who was an incredible boxer and fighter. This is why many people refer to Brockton as the City of Champs. There's even a small LCN presence in Brockton, or was, which is not known for Italians as far as I know. Carmen Totoro, who was one of the men inducted in the infamous recorded ceremony in Bedford, Mass, is from Brockton and controlled whatever loan sharking and bookmaking operations the Patriarch has had in the city. The city of Brockton is also very diverse. It's the only major city in Massachusetts with over 100,000 people, where black people make up the majority of the population. Boston has always been the center of black Massachusetts, but in the past few decades, because of soaring housing costs, more and more people are moving away from the actual city. Randolph and Brockton both have much higher percentages of black residents than Boston now. A couple other interesting statistics are Brockton has the biggest Cape Verdean population in America, with almost 6,000 more than Boston. It's also in the top 10 for Haitian populations in the United States, and other large ethnic groups in the city are Jamaicans and Brazilians. Brockton, Mass literally has every type of street organization you can imagine. There's so many local, homegrown neighborhood crews in the city of Brockton. It's crazy. There's also obviously nationally syndicated and affiliated sets, blue, red, GDs, like anything you can imagine is in the city of Brockton. There's Cape Verdean groups like the CVOs, Haitian crews, any type of underground, underworld crew that you can think of is probably operating in the city of Brockton. Brockton's also a stronghold for the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. This is where the Outlaws first set up shop in Massachusetts and started to challenge the HAMC's dominance of the Bay State. Brockton might not necessarily be the most dangerous city in Massachusetts. While it's definitely much more dangerous than the rest of the state in general, it's still, in my opinion, the most gangsta out of all the other cities on my list, except maybe for Gloucester, but I'm just going to let that one slide for this video, guys. You know what I mean? Hope you guys enjoyed this video with something a little bit differently. Hopefully it was fun for you guys, because I personally enjoyed it. I needed to do something that was a little bit fun. I haven't enjoyed videos for a little while. It's just when Massachusetts changing so fast and gentrification going full throttle in the Bay State, who knows how long different communities will be able to keep their unique identities. Most people, especially from outside the area, think Massachusetts is all wealthy white people and don't realize how diverse many of the communities really are. Just so you know, we have some really big things coming up on the channel. A friend of mine is going to start helping me with the editing so I can bring you guys some of these big stories I've been working on for a while. Make sure they're going to be presented in a really nice, shiny production, which so many of you guys seem to like so much on YouTube. No, I want to step up my production, and this kid is like a legit filmmaker, so if he really does help me, my videos are going to increase much, much more. Also, my friend Kevin and I are going to start doing Boston, Massachusetts, maybe even all of New England hood vlogs / interviews. We just got a little camera. I already got a couple lined up, and if you guys want to be on one, reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook. That reminds me, guys, if you're on Instagram, just follow me. It's J_Trimmins, my last name. It's like, I'm not trying to have a popularity contest. I just started doing it, but just get me up to like 1,000 or something, guys. It's like pathetic. So like always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was supposed to be fun, you know what I mean? Maybe you'll learn a couple things in between that you didn't know about some of these cities. And if people who aren't from Massachusetts watch this video, they'll kind of get a taste for the other side of Massachusetts. That's the kind of whole point. The video was supposed to be fun. I've had a lot of stuff going on the past couple weeks. A lot of heavy stuff was going on too. So I just want to do something light. We got a lot of things we're working on the channel. We bring in some really good content to you more frequently in the near future, but this was supposed to be fun, a little bit of education too, and let people see that there is another side of Massachusetts. They think that Massachusetts is only one way, but there's always two sides to every story. So you guys know what's most important though. Make good choices, make good decisions, because that's all we have, guys. We can't control other things around us, can't control the people, places, and things. We can control our actions, our choices, and our decisions. That's why I say it at the end of the video, because you guys wonder, like, why does he say it every time? That's because that's what we have in life, guys. Everything is our choices and decisions. Not for me preaching, though. Take good care of yourselves, your family, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a nice day, guys. I'll be back real soon with real more good content. God bless you.